The Wicked Will Rise, Chapter 18. Polychrome's so-called lumatorium was a dim, windowless chamber hidden deep in the castle's interior behind a revolving bookshelf. It was crowded with mysterious, vaguely scientific-looking instruments, long lavatory tables, and beakers and flasks full of colorful liquids and powders. Looking around the room, I was struck by how many different types of magic there were in Oz, and how many different ways there were of practicing it. For some people like Mombi, and me, come to think of it, magic was something you just kind of did. It was all instinct, a power that came directly from within. For other people, it was a practice closer to science. The first style seemed a lot more convenient to me. But on the other hand, Mombi had sent me here because she thought Polychrome would uncover things that she hadn't been able to. So I guess there's something to all this junk. Polychrome moved around the room, efficiently gathering up her materials, while Heathcliff curled up in the corner, observing her lazily. When she had everything she deemed necessary, she gestured for me to empty my bag again. "Let's take a look at those," Polychrome said, and I set the objects I'd taken from the Lion and the Tin Woodman on a table. Polychrome in turn placed each of them in either end of the old-fashioned scale, which indicated, improbably, but that they were perfectly balanced with each other. The metal heart thumped robotically. The tail continued to twitch, as if it attached to an invisible owner. Polychrome sprinkled them with a dusting of acrid-smelling powder, causing them to halt in their motion. She fastened a thick, old-fashioned set of goggles on her face and knelt to examine them. "Just as I suspected," she said after a bit. She lit a candle, and then, after some consideration, picked up a long, hollow glass, rod-tipped with a tiny red orb. She touched the orb gently to the Tin Woodman's heart and held it there. The rod began to change colors, filling with a sort of pink liquid, which she emptied into a beaker before repeating the same process with the tail. She held the beaker over the candle, and we both watched as it began to heat up and bubble. "What are you doing with it?" I asked. "Just running a few magical tests," she said. "My methods are somewhat different from those used by the witches. I'm isolating the mystic elements of the objects to determine their origin, as well as, hopefully, to divine their purposes. It seems strange, of course, but they have any enchantment in them at all. When the wizard granted them in their owners, he had no facility with magic to speak of. So one wonders that they should now be imbued with such energies. But indeed they are. Is it something that Dorothy did, or is there another exclamation?" The liquid on the beaker boiled quickly over the flame, until all that was left was a thick, red syrup resembling blood. Polychrome selected a wide, shallow silver bowl from a shelf, placed it next to the scale, and poured a strange substance from it. She crouched and peered at it carefully through her goggles, swirling it around a little with her finger. Next, she waved her palm across the surface and mumbled a few quick words that I didn't understand. The liquid began to change color until it was transparent. Polychrome nodded to herself. "Look," she said, and when I gazed into the bowl with her, I saw that there was now an image of it in it. In the bowl, as clear as if I were looking through a window, was a flat, dusty prairie under a gray sky, tall grass blowing in the wind. I recognized it immediately. Maybe not the exact specific location, but the idea of it. Back home, the prairie was everywhere. Even when you were standing in the strip mall or walking along a busy highway, it was always still there, just out of sight. The flat everything, the gray, dusty nothing seeping into your pores. So I had no doubt of exactly what I was looking at. "Kansas," I said. "Indeed," Polychrome said quietly. "And yet, is it?" I looked closer. It was Kansas, but it wasn't. It was like one of those games in the back of a celebrity magazine where you look at two pictures of Jennifer Aniston, and in the second one, everything is just a little bit off. Except in this version, the difference wasn't that Jennifer Aniston was wearing a pink bracelet instead of a blue one. It was something harder to put your finger on than that. It was something about the way the wind was blowing, something about the thick clouds that were rolling in. It didn't just look lonely, it looked sick. It looked evil. It sent a chill down my spine. "What does it mean?" I asked quietly. Polychrome was silent. Heathcliff padded over to where she stood, and she peeled her goggles off, then knelt and touched her forehead to the cat's horn, staring into his eyes. She seemed to be consulting with him in a silent conversation. Eventually she turned back to me, still kneeling. "It could mean several things," she said. "I still have many questions about these items, but certainly it means that they bear a deep connection with the other place. Your home. The wizard's home. Dorothy's home. I also sensed something not quite right about them. Something evil, I suppose. There was something about these things that was corrupting their owners. It was time to stop holding back, I knew. The wizard told me that until I gathered them, I wouldn't be able to kill Dorothy. Polychrome twisted a lock of hair around her finger. She chewed on her lip. It makes a certain sense, she said. If these items were somehow holding a piece of Dorothy's essence, it would explain this connection to the other place. It might even explain the evil about them. And yet, she dipped a finger into the pool. I don't know. I sensed nothing of Dorothy in the tincture. You would think... She crossed her arms and looked up at the ceiling, confounded. I just don't know, she sighed. Here in Oz, we understand so very little of the other place, or of how Oz is connected to it. We never have. It's a shame that the one person who does have knowledge of it is the one person we can't ask. Dorothy? No, nor do I believe the wizard had much expertise when it came to the matters of the other place, despite hailing from there. But Glinda has made a study of your world, of Oz's magic practitioners. She's the only one who has demonstrated an ability to summon visitors from the outside, though many have tried. Do you think she's the one who brought me here? I asked. I was still struggling to put all these pieces together. Things were beginning to add up, but in a way I couldn't quite see an order to. It was like being halfway through a calculus problem, knowing you're in the right track and having no idea of the answer or how the hell you're supposed to get there. This time, I didn't think I would get the points for showing my work. It's possible, but part of me doubts it. What reason would she have had? And why would she made an enemy out of you so quickly if she'd been the one to bring you here? She was right. It didn't make any sense. I'm sorry I could not have been more help, Polychrome said. Perhaps if we had the third item, the Scarecrow's brain, it would complete the puzzle. I'm already on it, I said. And Amy, do me a favor. What? I asked. When you cut him open, make it hurt. I smiled. It's a promise, I said. With that, some of the girlishness returned to Polychrome's face. She gave me a conspirational look. Even before Dorothy came back and turned everyone evil, she said in a stage whisper, cuffing her palm to her mouth, the Scarecrow was always a bit of a dick. She giggled and tossed her hair, and some of the tension left the room. Now, she said, before we retire for the evening, I wanted to look into one more thing. She turned to her giant unicorn. Heathcliff, she said, fetch me your friend, the Queen. Heathcliff stood up on command, took a powerful leap across the room, and like a ghost, passed right through the wall. When Polychrome saw my look of surprise, she pursed her lips. Everyone doubts my unicorn, she said tartly. Just because he doesn't grant wishes doesn't mean he's useless. I can see that now, I said. And why do you need Ozma again? Polychrome pressed her finger to her chin. When we were in my rumpus room, I noticed a disturbance in the princess's aura, she said. Nothing that made me suspect that there might be more to her condition than I previously suspected. I would like to examine her. Is there anything about her that you would like to tell me? I couldn't tell if I was being tested. Is it possible she knew about Pete? Or knew that I knew? So I decided to hedge for the time being. Mombi was hoping you would be able to fix her. Make her more like how she used to be, I said, feeling guilty for both telling my half the truth and also for saying even that much. I'd been hoping to totally avoid the subject for Ozma. After my conversation with Pete yesterday, I was worried about what would happen if anything started messing around with whatever magic was binding him to the princess. What if they were fused forever? What if Pete just disappeared? He had made good on his promise to help me find Nox, and I didn't want to betray him now. A few minutes later, Heathcliff came padding back to the room with Ozma at his side. The princess looked sleepy and listless, like she had just been woken from a nap. Hello, cousin, Polychrome greeted her. Ozma looked up with an open and curious face, and Polychrome gently removed the scepter from her hand. For a second, Ozma looked reluctant to part with it, but she didn't put up a fight. Stand over here, just for a moment. The rainbow fairy led Ozma to a small footstool and helped the princess climb onto it. As Ozma stood there dutifully, Polychrome began to bustle around the room, pulling ingredients from the shelves in a way that looked random, and combining them haphazardly into a small cauldron that she suspended from a small stand over an eldritch flame. "What's that?" I asked, watching her suspiciously. "Oh, nothing much," Polychrome said. "Just a little tincture of revelation. Old family recipe. Not to worry, it's quite harmless. Tastes a bit like Earl Grey, I'm told." She sniffed at the cauldron, and when she was satisfied with the tincture had been properly prepared, she poured it into a little teacup ringed with a delicate floral pattern and a gilded rim. "Unicorn?" She placed the teacup on the floor where Heathcliff would reach it, and he bent his head and touched the liquid with his horn. I didn't notice that it had any effect, but when Polychrome examined the mixture again, she seemed happy with the result. She handed the cup to Ozma. "Drink up, your highness," she said, "and let all that is hidden be revealed. When all this is over, I hope that we can be lovely friends again." Ozma sipped tentatively at the cup and then, appearing to like the taste of it, gulped thirstfully. As she drank, her movements began to slow. The empty cup dropped from her hands and shattered on the floor. "Never liked the pattern anyway," Polychrome said to herself. I wasn't very worried about Polychrome's china. I was too busy wondering what was happening to the princess. Her arms dangled lazily at her sides. Her mouth went slack, and her eyes were heavy-laden with an expression of sedate peacefulness. Meanwhile, something was emerging from her, a green smoke that curled out from her chest and hovered in the center of the room. At first, it was just an indistinct cloud. Then its color shifted, and the smoke condensed as it gathered itself into recognizable forms. No, 2 forms, each of them hanging into the air next to each other, translucent but clearly visible as separate, familiar bodies. One of them was Pete, the other was Ozma, a second Ozma, a ghostly simulacrum of the version who was still standing in a semi-drugged state in the stool. Pete looked utterly himself, slim and lanky and a little bit mischievous, his features sharp and strong with an odd, mismatched beauty. This version of Ozma, though, was different, not in any way that I would really put a finger on, but in a way that was subtle and at the same time impossible to miss. Her eyes were bright and full of intelligence. Her posture, even as she hung suspended above the ground perfectly still, was regal and dignified. She had power about her, an awe-inspiring grace that, even knowing she wasn't real, made me want to kneel and bow my head to the ground. She looked, in short, like a queen. Behind them, the real Ozma, or what I guess was the real Ozma, observed the 2 spirit forms that had been summoned forth from somewhere deep within her. She didn't try to move from the stool she was standing on, and instead was simply looking on with the confused, sheepish guilt of a little kid who's just been caught next to a broken cookie jar, the cookies scattered across the floor. Polychrome looked back and forth between them and raised a knowing eyebrow. "Interesting," she said. "There had been 2 life forces occupying the princess's body. But you knew that already, didn't you?" She smirked in my direction, like she had a feeling all along this was what exactly she would find. I nodded. What else could I do? But Polychrome didn't seem to care that I had lied to her. "No matter," she said. "We all have our secrets. One of mine is that I'm not as dim as people often think. But actually, I have a whole cabinet of secrets. So much more convenient not to have them rattling around in my head, you know? It's much safer to have them all locked up, where I can't leave them lying around by accident. Anyway, I could run some more tests, but I have a nagging little suspicion that you already have most of the answers we could desire. Who is this second soul?" She stepped over to a spot where Pete's form hovered, and circled him, looking him up and down wolfishly. "Is he as charming as he appears?" I tried my best to explain the whole Pete situation, what I knew of it at least, to Polychrome, who nodded along with the stories I related to her. "I see," she said. "When Mombi attempted to disguise the princess, she inadvertently created the seed of a new soul. It happens. The trick is catching it and nipping it in the bud before it comes into itself. Mombi has always been so sloppy when it comes to the details. It seems simple now that you explain it. When Ozma was restored all those years ago, she suppressed this other soul. Then when Dorothy did her little number on the princess, the thing was allowed to flourish again. At any rate, it shouldn't interfere much with things." "What are you going to do?" I asked. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. I could see now that the spell Dorothy cast on the princess was all anger and impulse, no sense of precision at all, but it was powerful too. That makes it a bit more complicated, especially now that it's had so much time to put roots down, but I think with a little elbow grease I can restore Ozma to her proper state. The state that you see before you instead of the simpering, foolish nincompoop who has been occupying her place all these years. And that will certainly change the game, won't it? What will happen to him? To Pete? I tried to hide the panic I was feeling, but I don't think I did a very good job of it. My dear, Polychrome gave a sympathetic frown. Did you develop a little crush on the rogue soul? Well, he is handsome, I'll give you that, but you can't let yourself get all mushy over it. I imagine it'll just disappear. Please, I said. You can't. It's not a crush. He's a good person. I don't want him to die. Amy, sweetie, listen to me. It can't die when it's not alive in the first place. It's not a person at all, just a little bad witchery that got out of hand. No matter what happens, you'll always have your perfectly lovely memories of it now, won't you? And a memory is worth a lot, especially when Ozma's return will do so much for Oz. So you lose yourself a plaything. There's more fish in the sea. I didn't like the way she was talking to me, as if I had been some little girl and she was my big sister who had to come back from college and thought she knew everything because she had sex a couple of times and read some French novels. But while people like me had been fighting for Oz, Polychrome had just been locked up here in the castle doing practically no good to anyone while she played tonsil hockey with her vapid, rainbow-smoking boy toy. And now she was trying to lecture me about the good of Oz. Some people had a lot of nerve. On the other hand, she had a point. Having Ozma back for real would change the game in a serious way. Was the risk of losing Pete worth it? And even if it wasn't, could I stop it from happening? At this moment, the only thing I could be sure of was that Polychrome was annoying. Would you like a hug? She asked. No, thank you, I said. She snapped her fingers, and the floating image of Pete and Ozma were instantly sucked back into the body of the real princess, who doubled over at the shock of having all of her parts returned to her. She stumbled from the stool at which she'd been standing, and landed on her hands and knees on the stone floor of the lumatorium, and promptly began to retch. Instead of vomit pouring from her mouth, a flurry of tiny rainbows came out, and pooled on the ground in a sick puddle of jumbled-up colors. Polychrome ignored the fairy princess's distress, and instead directed her attention to me. Don't you fret all over this, at least not for now. The ritual of restoration will be difficult, and before I can perform it, I must ask my sprites to gather the necessary ingredients. Also, I need my rest. I can practically feel the dark circles forming under my eyes as we speak. And not to be a bitch, but you look like you could use a little beauty sleep too. I'll let Heathcliff take you to your room, and tomorrow you'll get everything all settled, okay? I'll take my stuff first, thanks, I said. And the things I'd taken from the Lion and the Tin Woodman seemed even more important now than ever, even if I didn't know why, and I didn't want to let them out of my sight. Of course, Polychrome said, and I gathered them quickly into my bag, wondering what to do next.